afternoon, everyone. So we'll be discussing the questions related to ethics in governance now. There are 6 questions. Actually, there are just 3 questions, 3.5 questions, if I were to put it correctly, because every question has 2 parts. The first question that has been asked in this year's paper for ethics in governance is related to corporate governance. So this year we were expecting a question on the topic of corporate governance, especially because of the entire news which has been there around the Hindenburg report, and it was very much an expected question. The question though is vastly different from what they have asked in the past. So let's have a look at the question. The question says that, what do you understand by moral integrity and professional efficiency in context of corporate governance? They're not asking about moral integrity in general. They are not asking about professional efficiency also in general. Both these concepts have to be discussed in context of corporate governance. So you have to explain what do these particular terms mean, and give possibly certain examples of moral integrity and professional efficiency in corporate governance. And then it says illustrate with the help of suitable examples. So you could possibly be giving examples from India and from across the world in order to justify the importance of moral integrity and professional competence or professional efficiency in corporate governance. Right. So let's look at what possibly could be the approach to this particular question. So, firstly, in this question, the way you would introduce the answer, right? So when we talk about question 1A, all of these questions have to be answered in less than 150 words. So in ethics, the biggest problem that we see most of the candidates face is not being able to complete the paper on time. And the reason for that is that they tend to go over the word limit which has been prescribed by UPSC. You have to keep it in mind that the length of the case studies which are being provided by UPSC now is too long, and therefore it may not be possible for you to attempt the paper properly if you exceed the word limit. So you have to stay within the word limits, right? So writing introduction and conclusion of course is important, but you have to ensure that your introduction and conclusion are crisp and to the point. So what could be a possible introduction in this kind of a question? See, one plain, simple, vanilla introduction could be where you could provide definition of what is corporate governance, right? So you could provide the definition of the term corporate governance, and then you could talk about some of the aspects of corporate governance. So once you mention what is corporate governance, you could mention some of the important principles of corporate governance, and then you could talk about that how the two principles that have been highlighted here, which is moral integrity and professional efficiency, are also two really crucial and important principles of corporate governance. So this is one simple introduction which can be provided by you in this particular question. The other way in which you could write the answer to this question is by relating to some current affairs happening, right? So this is one. The other alternate introduction which you could provide in this particular answer is talk about some current happening. Maybe talk about the scandal at ILNFS, right? Or you could possibly talk about the ICICI Bank scam that we came across recently. You could also be talking about the Hindenburg report. So you could talk about the Hindenburg report and how it has brought corporate governance into limelight in the recent times. So whatever of the current happenings or current affairs you could write about in the introduction could possibly be one of the ways to introduce this answer. So you could say that in the recent times, corporate governance has come into relevance because of some of the scams that have been unearthed in the corporate sector. For example, the ICICI Bank scam, or the Vodafone scam, or the scam related to the Hindenburg report, which has criticized or which has raised certain pertinent questions about the functioning of corporate entities in India, right? So that could be one of the ways in which you could introduce the answer. You could begin by explaining what is corporate governance as well. Now, what do we understand by corporate governance? Simply put, corporate governance as a term means when a corporate entity is run in such a manner, it is governed in such a manner so that it fulfills the interests of the multiple stakeholders associated with that corporate entity. Those multiple stakeholders would include the employees, would include the shareholders, the promoters, the board of directors, the management, the society, the customers of that particular organization, the government. All these stakeholders, those who are involved in the process of dealing with a corporate entity, when you try to protect their interests, when you try to promote their interests and not just the interest of shareholders and promoters of that particular corporate entity, that is what is called as corporate governance, right? So either you could begin with that introduction, or you could talk about some current affair happening and then come to some of the important aspects of corporate governance. The choice is yours. If I were in your place, I would go with this particular option, because almost everyone would be able to write this kind of an introduction where you write about the definition of the corporate governance, right? So once you have introduced the idea of corporate governance or the context of this particular question, then it would become important that you talk about some of the important principles of corporate governance. So you must make a passing reference of important principles of corporate governance in the initial part of your answer itself. Again, it need not be long drawn. You need not write 2-3 sentences on this, but just important principles and values of corporate governance. For example, one of the important values of corporate governance is legality, that any corporate entity must follow the law of the land as much as possible. You must talk about the principle of transparency. Any corporate entity must make sure that the dealings of that company, dealings of that corporate entity are known to all the stakeholders involved with that particular entity. You may also talk about inclusivity, that any corporate entity must try to make the decision making of that particular corporate entity inclusive in nature. How do you make the decision making inclusive in nature? By having a wide representation of the marginalized sections of the society in the management of that particular company, in the board of directors of that company, right? You could talk about accountability, that any corporate entity must be willing to hold itself accountable to the questions and be answerable to the various stakeholders of that company. So again, you need not explain in any of these principles, but just make a passing reference of this. Another way in which you could possibly do this is by drawing a diagram as well, where you can draw a diagram. At the center you can draw a circle or a triangle or whatever, and then you can mention that these are the principles of corporate governance, and then you mention those principles of corporate governance just to add more value to the answer, right? So it's not what is being asked in the answer as such, in the question as such. Once you have mentioned about some of these important values, then you can draw a linkage between what the question is asking and what you have written in the introduction. That is, among some of these principles of corporate governance, the two important principles of corporate governance are moral integrity and professional efficiency. So you have to link these two particular values of professional efficiency and moral integrity with the basic principles of corporate governance. Or even if you don't write the principles of corporate governance, in your introduction itself, when you're talking about some of the latest happenings or the current affairs with respect to corporate governance, there itself you could have mentioned that it was the lack of moral integrity and lack of professional efficiency which has spelled doomsday for several corporate entities in India as well as in the world. तो एक तरीका वो भी हो सकता है to write down the way you link what has been mentioned in the introduction to what you're going to mention in the body of the answer. Now, the question is that what do you understand by moral integrity and professional efficiency in context of corporate governance in India? Now, firstly, therefore, it is important for us to provide a basic definition of both of these terms. एक तो ये करना जरूरी है इस आंसर में, and then we have to talk about the importance of both of these, significance of both of these in corporate governance, especially giving examples from India. So now this is what has to be done in the rest of the answer once we have provided the introduction to this particular answer. Now, what do we understand by moral integrity? Moral integrity in context of corporate governance essentially refers to upholding highest values and standards in functioning of any corporate entity, which would include, again, transparency, accountability, responsiveness, inclusiveness, etc., and all of those things, right? So you, in the introduction, when you have mentioned possibly, let's say, about the importance of moral integrity, you must also mention that what is the definition of moral integrity in the body of the answer, right? So moral integrity, as I said, refers to steadfast, see, integrity in context of an individual is steadfast adherence to principles, values in one's lives, where you are not ready to compromise with your values and principles irrespective of any circumstance or irrespective of any particular situation. Moral integrity in case of a corporate entity would mean that a corporate entity sticks to its core values irrespective of whatever the circumstances are. It is not necessarily swayed away by profits or losses. It is not necessarily swayed away by what would be the perception of an action that they take in the market. Rather, they take a particular action because a corporate entity strongly believes in it, right? So what you can say is that moral integrity is nothing but steadfast adherence to the vision and the mission of an organization. Moral integrity is steadfast adherence to the core values of any organization. And you must give example of organizations that have shown moral integrity. You could possibly be talking about Tata, you could be talking about ISRO, you could be talking about any of these PSUs in India that have been able to show moral integrity in their functioning. Right? Then, what do we understand by professional efficiency? See, professional efficiency is that when in your profession, when at your work, you're able to do the work efficiently. When you are able to utilize the resources in an effective manner. When you are able to get the maximum out of minimum resources that are available to you. That is what is the meaning of the term professional efficiency. Not only that, professional efficiency also, so one aspect of professional efficiency is getting maximum out of minimum resources available. Professional efficiency also means having the requisite skills, having the requisite skill set in order to deal with the challenges which are thrown by the 21st century corporate entities. So today there is an increased competition in the market. Every corporate entity, to remain relevant, must be able to compete with the others, must be able to develop its own skill sets and its own USP. That is what is professional efficiency. There may be circumstances in which organizations don't have a lot of resources. We know about startups that are in a bootstrap model, where they have limited number of resources, yet they try to achieve maximum output or maximum productivity for themselves. So again, the point which we need to keep in mind is that professional efficiency is nothing but trying to get the maximum out of the minimum resources. Professional efficiency is trying to achieve maximum productivity in any organization. Here you could give example of various organizations again. You could give example of a Google, you could give example of Infosys, you could give example of TCS, several IT companies of India, which out of limited number of resources have been able to make a mark for themselves internationally, could be given as examples of professional efficiency. Once you have defined and once you have given the examples of professional efficiency, then we need to talk about the importance, the significance of professional efficiency and moral integrity, especially in context of India. Why is moral integrity so important for any corporate entity in India? First and foremost, in order to avoid scams, in order to avoid any cases of corruption, moral integrity becomes so crucial for any corporate entity. You could give the examples of, as I said, the ICICI scam, because there was lack of moral integrity, where the CEO is hand in glove with the individuals at the Videocon group, and they are providing them unsecured loans without doing due diligence. And that put the entire bank at a massive risk. Simply because the husband of the CEO, the husband of the ICICI bank, the person who was at the helm, was also the individual who was having stakes in Videocon. Right? ILNFS, where the management and their faulty practices were often overlooked by the board of directors and by the independent directors at the company. Right? So moral integrity is important to avoid corruption, is important to avoid scams. Moral integrity plays a very important role in getting better investments for a company as well, for a corporate entity. So any corporate entity would have better investment prospects if it follows the principle of moral integrity, because the investor confidence would be much higher in any such corporate entity that is governed according to the principle of moral integrity. Right? So greater investor confidence is also something that you can be talking about. You could talk about following the high transparency standards, for example, in Tata's, has helped them maintain a positive brand reputation for themselves. So moral integrity can play a very crucial role in maintaining a positive brand reputation for an organization, for a corporate entity also. Right? You could also be talking about that moral integrity is important in order to ensure a positive work environment. The employees of that particular organization take especially greater pride being involved with an organization that follows highest standards of moral integrity. Right? So these are some of the examples. Again, the list is endless. Okay, I mean, if I were to go on talking about the importance of moral integrity in the way a corporate entity functions, it would take a long time for us. But even if you mention 2 to 3 points, I think that should be enough. Then, why is professional efficiency important? So you must mention that professional efficiency is important. So we will now talk about the importance of professional efficiency. Right? Again, इसके अंदर भी 2-3 points लिख सकते हैं professional efficiency की importance में. You could talk about that how there is an increased competition in the market today, and it's very important that every corporate entity must be able to extract maximum out of every single buck that they invest in the functioning of that particular corporate entity. So you could be mentioning about the increased competition in the market and how that can be overcome with the help of with the help of professional efficiency. You must talk about that the challenges of market, the demands of the customer have started to become more and more. We witness the customer is becoming more and more demanding today, and therefore in order to deal with those specific challenges of the market as well, it is important that any corporate entity must adhere to, must follow the highest standards of professional efficiency as well. You could also talk about that in order to remain relevant as a corporate entity, if you want to remain relevant as a corporate entity, then also it is really important that you must have professional efficiency. Right? You can also talk about that there may be certain cycles in the economy where the investors may not be willing to put money into corporate entities, and corporate entities would have to function within certain limited number of resources. And if they have to function within those limited number of resources, then professional efficiency becomes really important. Right? So these are some of the ways in which you can talk about the importance of professional efficiency. Do give examples of as many organizations of you can in terms of moral integrity and professional efficiency. I think 3 points each would be more than enough. You could also talk about the efficient resource allocation. You could talk about efficient decision making within an organization. You could say that professional efficiency can help in managing the risks better which are associated with the economy, etc., and all of those things. And then in the conclusion of your answer, you could possibly mention about why or how these values can be incorporated in any organization. Again, a passing reference has to be made. ये values कैसे incorporate की जाएं? जैसे कि आप उसमें एक दो recommendations दे सकते हैं. You could give the recommendation of the Kotak committee. You could give the recommendation of the Kumar Mangalam committee. You could give the recommendation of Damodaran committee. Right? They have given recommendations like we should increase the number of independent directors in an organization in order to ensure moral integrity. You could talk about the upskilling of the employees of an organization on a regular basis through training programs to ensure professional efficiency. You could talk about adopting the OKR approach, the KPI KRA approach. If you remember, we discussed in our ethics classes about the OKR approach, the objectives, key results approach. An approach which has been adopted by several organizations across the world, including Google, Intel, Amazon, etc. So you could talk about that as well. Just a passing reference of that would be enough. Right? So this is as far as the first question is concerned. Now, how do you prepare this particular topic of corporate governance? See, there are numerous reports of the government expert committees that have been published on the issue of corporate governance. You could go through them. Otherwise, if you look at our material, the basic points that have been mentioned there should be enough to prepare this topic. The various dimensions that you need to prepare as a part of the topic of corporate governance is the meaning of the term corporate governance, important principles of corporate governance, importance of corporate governance in India, what are some of the challenges associated with corporate governance in India, some of the good examples, best practices of corporate governance that have been incorporated across the world. It is also important for you to prepare the recommendations of some of the expert committees on ensuring corporate governance in India. Also, please prepare the topic of CSR as well. What do you understand by corporate social responsibility? What are some of the benefits of corporate social responsibility? What are some of the challenges associated with the corporate social responsibility in India? Right? So prepare the entire topic of corporate governance like this. Anyway, so this is the first question, 1A. Anyone has any doubts or questions? Can we proceed further? Right, so let's have a look at the next question now. Now, ethics in international relations has been one of the favorite topics of UPSC in last few years. You would see that since 2017 or 18, they have been asking at least one question related to this particular topic in the exam. In fact, I would say that this year I was a tad disappointed that they only ended up asking one question related to ethics in international relations. And this is a very standard question. This is a very standard topic of the ethics in international relation. The question is that international aid is an accepted form of helping resource-challenged nations. So it is one of the ways of helping those countries, those nations which are not having enough resources, which are challenged in terms of resources. And then it says, comment on ethics in contemporary international aid. So we have to basically talk about what are some of the ethical concerns and what is the foundation of the ethics which is leading to some countries helping the others. Right? And then it says, support your answer with suitable examples. See, one thing that you must keep in mind, and which I'm sure that Smriti ma'am also told you, is irrespective of whether they ask you to write down examples in the answer or not, you have to write down the answer, examples. Right? In any question related to ethics, until and unless you write the examples, don't expect to get above average marks. Average marks everyone can get. 80, 85, 90 marks are not very difficult to get in ethics, and you will find numerous candidates, those who are paying the mains examination, getting marks like that. But if you want to secure more than 100, if you want to secure possibly more than 120, then you have to substantiate your answers with the help of examples. Right? So now, in this particular question, what are the ways in which we can introduce? So see, it is saying that पहले तो वो international aid के बारे में एक perspective दे दे रहा है कि international aid is a way in which some of the countries of the world help the other countries which are resource starved. And in this context, we have to comment on what is the significance in terms of ethics of international aid. अगर आप हमारा material भी पढ़ेंगे, in that material also, we have covered the topic of the international aid with respect to the the topic of ethics in international relation. Now, what is the introduction which can be provided to this particular question? So let's try to understand the introduction that could have been provided in this question. So question 1b. One of the ways is that you simply define what is international aid. ना तो एक तो simple again कुछ भी अगर समझ में नहीं आ रहा हो, so we can always provide the definition of international aid. It is assistance that is provided by nations to each other in times of need, especially to those countries which are resource starved. Right? That is what is the meaning of the term international aid, which you can mention broadly. You could give some certain examples as well of international aid. The relief provided by countries to Turkey during earthquake. The vaccine Maitri adopted by India during COVID-19 is an example of international aid. Then we have seen in case of the Myanmar crisis, the aid that was provided by various nations to the countries such as India and Bangladesh to deal with the refugee crisis created as a result of Rohingya crisis is again an example of international aid. So numerous examples of international aid can be given here, right? So that is one of the ways of introducing the answer to this particular question. Another way of introducing the answer to this question is the, again, example way. Okay, so you could give example of, you could begin with, when we talk about certain, so you could write an example of India providing vaccines to the other countries of the world when they were in need during COVID-19 as an example of international aid, right? Then you could give other examples of international aid as well. The assistance that was provided by United States of America to India in the times of food crisis, agrarian crisis in 1960s, by providing us the ships, containers full of food, the PL-480 ships that were sent to India, again an example of the international aid, right? So numerous examples can be given. You could substantiate your introduction with the help of an example only. और वहीं पे आप उसको introduce कर दीजिए international aid होता क्या है. Then we will come down to the meat of the question. That is, what is the ethics? What are the ethical issues associated with international aid? So when we talk about ethical issues associated with international aid, firstly, let's talk about what is the ethical foundation. So what is the ethical foundation of international aid? Why do other countries provide help to the other nations? On the basis of ethics and morality first we are talking about, right? So see, the first reason for this is that it is a part of global cooperation strategy. We know that countries cannot be dealing with natural calamities, disasters on their own today. No country is capable of dealing with any problem on their own completely. And therefore, international aid, international assistance is required to promote global cooperation, to foster the spirit of the brotherhood within the entire global community, right? So you could again give numerous examples here of how global cooperation is the major reason because of which countries come to the help of each other, right? The ethical foundation of the international aid. Second is due to altruistic purposes. So due to altruistic purpose. Right, what I mean by altruistic purpose here is that countries help each other not expecting anything in return from the other nations. Countries provide assistance to the others not expecting anything in return. That is what is called as the altruistic angle to providing international aid to other countries. When India sent aid to Nepal in the 2015 earthquake, We did not expect them to respond back. When there was an earthquake in Pakistan, we sent food, we sent medicines, we sent clothes to Pakistan, not expecting anything in return. It is simply because of the goodness of our act, because our deed is good. We want to help the other countries because it is the right thing to do so. Right? So because of altruistic purposes as well, you could justify the international aid provided by one nation to the other country. Right? So that is another thing which you can talk about, why countries provide aid to each other. Third could be with the perspective of capacity building and promoting strategic partnership. So countries may be looking at helping each other with the perspective of building the other's capacity. When United States of America signed the 123 nuclear deal with us, and they got into an arrangement that they would be providing access to the civil nuclear technology to India, one could call it as an example of foreign aid or international aid only. What is the purpose? To promote long-term strategic partnership between India and USA. An example of international aid coming with the idea of promoting strategic partnership. India helping the African nations in launching their satellites. India providing technical aid to African nations with respect to GIS or with respect to agricultural practices is again an example of international aid. See, international aid should not be perceived only as money. International aid should not be perceived only as the material help in terms of clothes, fooding, or in terms of clothes or food or medicines, etc. But international aid also means when you provide technology assistance to the other countries. That is also a form of international aid only. In fact, in your introduction itself, you could have mentioned that generally international aid is perceived to be something material, but it can be intangible as well. Intellectual property, technology transfer is also an important form of international aid. Right? So this is something that you can mention. You could talk about the reasons for the international aid that are provided by various nations in term of in perspective of these three particular aspects. And so you can mention with respect to capacity building, you can mention with respect to global cooperation, you could mention with respect to altruistic purposes, और भी बहुत सारी चीजें हैं, but I think three should be enough. Then we have to also talk about ethical concerns associated with the international aid, because it is saying you have to analyze, you have to contextualize international aid in terms of ethics. So we have to talk about the ethical concerns as well, which are associated with a country providing international aid to the other. The first aspect that we can talk about is neo-colonialism. Many countries, in the name of providing international aid to others, are perpetuating nothing but a new form of colonialism. They are trying to create or establish their control over the resources of the other countries. Often the exploitation of the natural resources of the other countries happens at the expense of this international aid provided by nations. You could give example of China investing in African economies has been criticized across the world because of their neo-colonialist tendencies. Right? So that is one example which you can provide here. The second ethical concern associated with international aid is that often international aid is conditional aid. So it comes along with certain conditions. Right? It comes along with certain conditions. So there is a conditional aid also, which is provided by various international organizations and by countries, that compromises the sovereignty of various nations. So this conditional aid compromises the sovereignty It compromises the sovereignty of various nations, right? You could talk about how when the IMF provided international assistance to India in 1991, we had to follow certain conditions, or we had to observe certain conditions in order to get this international aid from the IMF. Even the World Bank assistance that is provided to various nations in the form of soft loans does not come without its own conditions, right? Then you may say that there are often ulterior motives, vested interests associated with international aid. Give example of investment by China in Nepal, China in Sri Lanka, Hambantota port. Initially they invested saying that we are going to build a civil port or a civil facility here for civilian purposes, and later on they made it into a military port. The assistance that has been provided by China to Nepal is clearly aimed at reducing or countering the influence of India on the Nepal economy or Nepal politics, to woo Nepal towards China. So that is another thing which you can mention about. You can also mention about debt trap. Often this international aid comes with a debt trap. Sri Lanka ko China ne aid provide kiya, and now Sri Lanka is in a debt trap. They have to, they can't pay off this loan as well, and there is no way that they can wish away this loan as well, or that which they owe to China today. And as a result of that, they need to continuously follow the conditions that have been imposed by China. You can also mention about how international aid is often used for the purpose of political manipulation as well. Aid provided by USA to several Latin American countries in the past could be one of the examples of this. So these are some of the ethical concerns associated with international aid provided by the, or the ethical concerns associated by with the idea of providing international aid. Once you have mentioned about the concerns, once you have mentioned about the foundational reasons for ethical, for international aid, then we need to write down the conclusion. Now you must talk about that how, in order to combat the problems of 21st century, such as climate change, such as terrorism, such as global hunger, poverty, it is really important that all the countries of the world must come together to help each other, not due to vested interest, not due to selfish interest, but due to the idea of promoting the entire humanity, promoting the concerns of the entire humanity. And here you could mention specifically about the idea of the Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, or the entire globe is a village. The philosophy with which India's international relation approach has always been driven, and that is how the entire world should also perceive providing international aid to each other. Right? So that is how you could conclude giving the answer to this particular question. Again, your answer has to be loaded with as many examples as possible. Is this clear to everyone? Any questions? Yes. You can mention that. You can mention that international aid provided by countries to international organizations can also result in international organizations not being independent in their functioning. You can mention that. Right? There was a concern related to Chinese funding to WHO, and as a result of which, WHO was not independent in nature. So you can mention those things, right? Anyone? Any other questions? Yes. हाँ मैंने अभी तो एग्जाम्पल बताया मैंने, नेपाल, श्रीलंका, all of these are examples of that only. What is the question? हाँ अभी तो यही तो, हाँ political decision making of Sri Lanka has been affected, Bangladesh has been affected as a result of international assistance provided by China. That also can be said. Yes. There was someone else who was asking a question before you. Can I attend that? Yes. Not you, sir. There was someone who put up the hand before you. आपके पीछे भी है सर कोई, आपके पीछे भी तो है ना कोई, है ना, बताइए. Yes, yes, of course, why not? Yes. Training of the Bhutanese and Nepalese officers, Sri Lankan, we invite the officers from SAARC countries to attend the training at Labasna, and you could give that example. Yes, yes. हाँ जी बोलो. Just one sentence. So do I need to explain all the points in detail? Of course not, sir. It will not be possible. आप इतना सब कुछ लिख ही कैसे पाओगे? If you have to, अगर आप देखिए इसके ऊपर अगर आप एक एक पॉइंट पे भी 10-10 वर्ड भी लिख देंगे तो ही आपका 150 वर्ड का लिमिट क्रॉस हो जाएगा. So you can't write a lot. So you have to write just 10 words each and just write down example. Example भी short में लिखिएगा. For example, Chinese assistance to African countries. इतना ही लिखिए बस. ठीक है? Yes. Depends on how you look at it, sir. You can mention that as a negative or as a positive. The European countries or NATO countries providing aid to Ukraine, do we look at it positively or negatively? Depends on you, how you want to put it in the exam. It's completely a subjective issue, right? Yes, there was someone else. Yes. Huh. या मतलब सी कोई हार्ड एंड फास्ट रूल नहीं है ना सर कि एग्जांपल्स आपने बिगनिंग में देने हैं, इंट्रोडक्शन में देने, कंक्लूजन में देने. डिपेंड्स अपॉन हाउ यू वांट टू स्ट्रक्चर द आंसर. दिस इज व्हाट आई एम टेलिंग यू दैट in my opinion the structure of the answer should be. You can always have an alternate to that. Yes, there was some. Yeah. Because you're right. So in international relation we say that we should always promote national interest, but that is not true, sir. है ना, ऐसा नहीं है कि इंटरनेशनल रिलेशन में यू शुड ओनली प्रमोट नेशनल इंटरेस्ट और दूसरी दुनिया जहां भाड़ में जाए. दैट इज नॉट द पॉलिसी विद विच वी follow our international relations. Our international relations are based on the principle of Panchil. They are based on the respecting the sovereignty of other countries. They are based on fostering global cooperation. Our DPSPs, Article 51 is also talking about that. So it's not that. So there is always, that is what the dilemmas in international relation are. That whether you promote national interest or whether you promote ethics. And there are multiple approaches to international relations as well. Right? So we have the realist approach where you promote national interest only. You have the idealist approach where you only promote ideals and the high values and morals. And then there is a principled realism where you adopt a middle path. Right? So ideally we should try to balance both of them. But in all circumstances it may not be possible to balance both of them. तो वो एक स्टैंडर्ड क्लासिकल डायलेमा है इंटरनेशनल रिलेशंस में. ठीक है? यस, समवन एल्स, देयर वाज वन मोर स्टूडेंट देयर ना, किसी और ने भी was asking question out of turn. हाँ बोलो. You can mention that also. Yes, sustainable development goals can be achieved, etc. You can mention that in conclusion. You can mention that in between also. बिल्कुल, absolutely. International aid, okay, you can mention that. I mean, if you want to stretch the idea of international aid to military assistance as well, fair enough. I won't say it's wrong. That is also international aid only. When we sent our forces to Sri Lanka, as a when the civil war was on in Sri Lanka, that was also an example of international aid only. So you can give that example as well. Okay? Yes, is that clear? Now let's move on to the next question quickly because then we'll run out of time. I realize that it's already 3:26. So yes, there are a number of questions that have been asked by UPSC on this particular topic of ethics in international relations. I think this is very, very important. You must prepare this particular topic. कहाँ से prepare करें? एक बार आप Vision IS का material देखिएगा, which we have provided for ethics. I think that should be a good source to begin. Anyway, now let's move on to the next question. Next question says, corruption is the manifestation of failure of the core values in the society. In your opinion, what measures can be taken or can be adopted to uplift the values in the society? So two-part question, very simple, straightforward. Firstly, it says that, see, there are various reasons for corruption that we study.
we study legal reasons, we study historical factors, we study institutional factors, we study societal factors. यहाँ पे ये कह रहा है कि core values क्योंकि पूरी तरीके से collapse कर गई हैं, decline कर गई है, इसलिए corruption हम society के अंदर ज़्यादा से ज़्यादा देख रहे हैं. So now in this particular question, question 2A, how do we introduce the answer to this particular question? See, one is that you could simply, again, वही definition of corruption. Corruption means using the public office for private gains. एक तो वो तरीका है और फिर example दे दिया. दूसरा ये है that you may give some examples of recent studies, surveys, that India's ranking on the Transparency International Perception Index is very low. According to a study conducted by McKinsey, India's civil services were ranked as the most corrupt in South Asia. So, आप इस context में begin कर सकते हैं that there is a lot of corruption within the Indian society, and then you give examples of corruption either through scams or through some of the rankings, etc., in the Indian society, and relate that examples of corruption and scam in the Indian society to the decline or collapse of the core values in the society. Right? So you can say that, आप ऐसे mention कर सकते हो that even though there are multiple reasons, including legal factors, historical factors, institutional factors, societal factors for the decline, for the resultant corruption in the Indian society, the decline of moral values, decline of core values is one of the biggest or one of the most important reasons for corruption in the society. So here, when we talk about decline of core values, see, what we have seen is that from community-based living or from the community form of living, we have moved to individual-based living today. And therefore, people do not have any qualms in earning money, in earning resources at the cost of the others. This has what has led to corruption. कि मैं अगर सरकारी ऑफिसर हूं तो मैं जितना लूट सकता हूं लूटूं, किसी को नुकसान होता है तो हो, मेरे को क्या फर्क पड़ता है, मैं इस आदमी से जितनी ब्राइब खींच सकता हूं खींचूं, ये आदमी जाके इस ब्राइब को देने के लिए अपना पेट काटे तो काटे, मेरे को क्या फर्क पड़ता है. That is one of the biggest reasons because of which we are seeing more and more corruption in the society today. That we have moved from community-based living to individual living. We have moved to a materialistic society. So we have moved to a society where what and how much money you have is what is more important, rather than whether you have earned that money through legal or ethical means or not. Then you can say that there is a certain amount of societal acceptance which has now been built towards corruption. That is why also corruption thrives in the society today. Earlier, people would look down upon someone who would be involved in a corrupt act. But today, it is seen as a, it is not seen as a problem in the society. So we have developed a tolerance towards corruption in the society, and we have lowered our expectations, lowered our standards as a society, and that has also led to corruption. Right? So that is another reason. Then you can say that there is disregard for fairness in the society in general. So people do not really feel that fairness or honesty or values such as justice, etc., really hold importance to them, and as a result of that also we are seeing more and more people being involved in corrupt activities. Right? So that is another reason which you can say. Then you can say that accountability in the society has diminished completely. Accountability of government officers, accountability of public servants to the citizens, those mechanisms have diminished significantly. The independence of the media has been compromised. It has become very easy to manipulate the narrative in the nation, and as a result of that also we see more and more corruption in the society. Right? So that is something which you can be mentioning. Then you can also say that we have started to witness weak governance norms as well. Right? So the overall governance values have also declined in the society, and that has also led to increased corruption in the society. So there are numerous core values which you can say have been declining in the society, which have resulted in corruption. और यहाँ पे examples ज़रूर दीजिएगा. So you could, when you're talking about, let's say, societal acceptance, you could say that when now IAS officers or civil servants are caught taking bribes, the question is not that why this person was taking bribe, the question was that why was he taking such less bribe, है ना? So भाई 5 लाख रुपया लेते हुए पकड़ा गया आईएएस ऑफिसर, तो लोग बोल रहे हैं कि इतना बस कम, इतने के अंदर ही ये बिक गया, है ना? So the concern is not that this person was caught taking bribe, the concern is कि इतने कम के अंदर कैसे हो गया, right? So again the point that I'm trying to make is that give examples, illustrations भी देंगे तो भी चलेगा, जरूरी नहीं है real life examples हो, illustrations would also be enough. Now then the second part of the question is much easier, उसको deal करना बहुत आसान है. It says that what are the measures that can be taken to restore these values in the society. अब let's talk about restoration of values in the society. See, firstly you must talk about the role models. We should have role models in the society whom we can look up to, who are involved in such acts of integrity, ethics, those who are not involved in misuse of their official position. So we must tell stories about them publicly to different people. You could talk about Lal Bahadur Shastri's life, could be an example for the other politicians and for the public servants as to how one should conduct in public life. You could talk about the ethical education in schools, in colleges, imparting of more importance to the moral education, moral science subject in the schools and colleges is also something that you can mention. You can mention about the involvement of civil society organizations, involvement of CSOs, right, in order to create awareness, in order to ensure accountability of the government officers to the citizens. You could also talk about providing exemplary punishment to corrupt public officials so that corruption can become a high risk and a low reward activity, right? So that is something which you can mention. Then apart from it, you could also mention about use of technology in order to usher an era of transparency in governance, right? So that is also something which you can talk about. Then you must also talk about the role of family in imparting the core values in the society. The role of family is something which can't be discounted when it comes to imparting ethical behavior within the society, right? So बहुत सारे examples हैं. You can also segregate them into societal measures, family based measures, legal measures, etc. वो आपकी मर्जी है. You can do that as well in this particular question, right? So there are numerous things which can be mentioned in this particular question as well. And sky is the limit. ये बहुत ही simple straightforward question है. Corruption के ऊपर UPSC multiple times question पूछ चुकी है. And there are so many questions that have been asked on corruption by UPSC in the past as well. For example, non-performance of duty by a public servant is a form of corruption. Do you agree with this view? Justify your answer. There have been numerous other questions also that have been asked in the past related to the topic of corruption. Is this clear to everyone? Can we proceed further? इसमें आप दूसरी कंट्रीज के एग्जाम्पल भी दे सकते हैं, सिंगापुर का एग्जाम्पल दे सकते हैं, ओम्बुड्समैन एग्जाम्पल ऑफ स्कैंडिनेवियन कंट्रीज भी दे सकते हैं, right? You could talk about enacting a strong whistleblower protection law as well, and all of those things as well. Anyway, now let's move on to the next question. In context of work environment, differentiate between coercion and undue influence with suitable examples, right? So now how, अब देखिए दो चीजें हैं, coercion और undue influence, ये दोनों का इफेक्ट सेम है पर इन दोनों का मेथड अलग है. What is coercion? मुझे किसी अपने सबऑर्डिनेट से काम करवाना है और वो ऐसा काम है जो कोई और मेरे टीम में काम करने को तैयार नहीं है. So I will tell that subordinate that if you don't do this, then I will demote you. If you don't do this, I will take a disciplinary action against you. Coercion could also be in form of sexual harassment of an employee at the organization to get some work out of them or to get some favor out of them, right? So that is coercion. Undue influence क्या होता है? That if you do this work for me, then I will be giving good remarks in your ACR. अगर तुम मेरे घर की सब्जी सब सामान वामान लेकर आओगे रोज, है ना, मेरी जो वाइफ है, मेरे बच्चे, उन सबको घुमाने ले जाओ बाहर ऑफिस टाइम के अंदर, देन आई विल definitely put in a word about your posting at the international organization. That is what is called as undue influence. So coercion, you are forcing someone. Undue influence, you are giving a lure to someone to do something which is unethical. Coercion usually is illegal. आप किसी को फोर्स नहीं कर सकते कुछ करने के लिए कि तू ये नहीं करेगा तो मैं तेरे बारे में जाके सेक्सुअल हरासमेंट की कंप्लेंट डाल दूंगा. दिस इज कोअर्जन. अनड्यू इन्फ्लुएंस इज यूजुअली नॉट इलीगल बट इज डेफिनेटली अनएथिकल. सो the organization law or code of conduct may not necessarily be telling you that you can't promise your subordinates that you will be giving them promotion if they do their personal work, but unethical to zarur hai. So this is what is the difference between coercion and between undue influence. Ab wo ye keh raha hai in this question, in context of work environment, differentiate between coercion and undue influence with the help of suitable examples. So sabse pehle, this question is related to the topic of work culture. In this particular question, the introduction could be, this is what, 2B. So in this question, the introduction could be where you talk about how a healthy work environment is a necessity for any organization. So you may talk about the importance of a healthy work environment. Just in brief, again, लंबा चौड़ा कुछ लिखने की जरूरत नहीं है. Healthy work environment can create a positive atmosphere within the organization, can lead to better efficiency within the organization. It can lead to growth and the well-being of the employees of the organization and any entity. Then you would say that in a healthy work environment, two values that are seemingly, or two actions that are seemingly close to each other can create an adverse impact. These are firstly coercion and secondly undue influence. तो पहले तो जब आप coercion और undue influence को इंट्रोड्यूस करें वहीं पे इनकी डेफिनेशन भी प्रोवाइड कर दें. coercion क्या है? coercion is pressure, some kind of force that you exercise on an individual to get some work done. Undue influence is manipulation of someone by offering them something, by luring them into something. That is what is undue influence. Illustration के through example इसको justify कर दीजिएगा, है ना. तो just give an example to justify it. Then if we differ between two of them, अब देखिए difference के अंदर best हमेशा ये रहता है that you can use tabular form as well, even though I personally don't recommend using tabular form, but you can always use a table on various parameters. और the second is कि आप different factors उठाइएगा और उसके basis के ऊपर बोलिएगा कि how do coercion and undue influence differ from each other. So what are the factors on the basis of which coercion and undue influence differ from each other? First is on the basis of nature. When we talk about nature of coercion, it is direct and explicit. आप एम्प्लॉय को बोलते हो कि ये काम कर वरना डिसिप्लिनरी एक्शन ले लूंगा तेरे खिलाफ, राइट? सो इन केस ऑफ कोअर्जन, दिस इज डायरेक्ट एंड एक्सप्लिसिट, whereas in case of undue influence, it is indirect and subtle in nature. It is indirect and subtle in nature, right? So you remind your team member कि मैंने तेरी उस समय इतनी मदद करी थी, I had helped you or I had given you those favors, now you should help me in this particular situation. मेरे बारे में ये information बॉस को मत बताना. Don't give this information to my wife. that I had been to Thailand, right? So, so indirect influence, nature. Then motive could be another difference, another factor of difference between coercion and undue influence. So motive, in case of coercion, the motive is to achieve a specific outcome. Motive is to achieve a specific outcome. So you want your employee to do some work, you want your employee to be achieving some task, you tell him कि या तो ये काम कल करके लेके आना, रिपोर्ट बना के लाना, या फिर ऑफिस मत आना. This is where we can say that the motive is to achieve a specific outcome. Whereas in case of undue influence, the motive is largely to use your position of trust, authority to ask someone to do something. Where you say that, see, you know, everyone in this company stays back for work. You must also do the same. I don't care about what work you have at home. So we can say that where you use your position or authority with some kind of angle of trust being exploited, then we can say it is an example of undue influence. And so that is also something which you can mention about undue influence. Now, once you have mentioned about the difference between undue influence and coercion, you must mention about what are the negative impact, negative effects that both of them can create on work environment in any particular organization. किसी भी organization के अंदर ये negative effect जो create कर सकता है. इसमें देखिए एक दो चीजें और भी हैं, legality की भी बात कर सकते हैं आप. That coercion is almost always illegal. Undue influence may be illegal, but it is definitely unethical in nature. तो ये भी एक difference हो सकता है between coercion and undue influence in terms of the legality as well, right? And then you can talk about some of the negative aspects of both the undue influence and coercion in the conclusion. You can say that it creates a bitter work environment within the organization. It leads to harassment of the employees. It can even lead to sexual harassment and sexual exploitation of the employees in the organization as well, right? You could say that it could diminish the trust between the organization and between the employees, between the leadership of the organization and the employees of the organization. So all those things can also be mentioned here, right? So again, now I don't think that it was possible to necessarily prepare this question in advance, because no such question has been asked by UPSC in the past, and I doubt that this was it was possible to prepare this question in advance properly, right? You have to apply your mind at that point of time. You will have to think at that point of time only in the exam. That's the kind of question this is. I would say that this was more or less a tough question, moderate to tough question. आंसर किया जा सकता है, बट आपको वहां पर उस फ्रेम ऑफ माइंड में आप होने चाहिए. इसीलिए आई ऑलवेज कीप टेलिंग टू स्टूडेंट्स दैट यू मस्ट बी एज फ्रेश as you can be when you go into the examination. You must have had a proper sleep, otherwise to deal with these questions can become a big nightmare, and it can be a real nightmare to deal with such kind of questions where you have to apply your mind and you have to think out of the box in the examination itself. Now let's quickly move on to the next question. This has been again a topic on which UPSC has asked a number of questions in the past. Conscience is conscience a more reliable guide when compared to laws, rules and regulations in context of ethical decision making? Discuss. तो ये basically कह रहा है conscience versus rules, regulations and laws, which one should we be following in case of ethical decision making? Which one is more reliable? Is conscience a more reliable guide? Before that, let me also tell you there are a number of questions that have been asked by UPSC on this particular topic. In 2020, they had asked a question, distinguish between laws and rules, discuss the role of ethics in formulating them. Rules and regulations provide all the civil servants the same, yet there is difference in their performance, etc. तो ये question 2022 में UPSC ने पूछा था. इसके ऊपर एक दो question और भी पूछ चुकी है UPSC पहले on the laws, rules and regulations. I think this is the simplest topic that can be asked in the examination. Now, since the question is that क्या conscience एक better guide है laws, rules और regulations के comparison में ethical decision making में, तो सबसे पहले तो आप एक ethical dilemma का example दीजिए. So you begin the answer to this particular question by giving example of an ethical dilemma, or by explaining what ethical decision making involves. Ethical decision making involves comparing, contrasting values which are involved in a particular situation as a result of taking different actions in that situation. So ethical decision making is nothing but evaluating, choosing course of action based on moral principles and values. That is what is the meaning of the term ethical decision making. And while taking an ethical decision, while making or resolving an ethical dilemma, one has to rely upon conscience as well as rules and regulations depending upon the situation. Now, you may mention that in such a situation, there can always be a conflict in a person's mind, that whether I should follow conscience or whether I should follow rules and regulations. Now, firstly, what are the advantages of following conscience? तो conscience को follow करने के advantages क्या हैं किसी भी एक particular ethical decision making में? See, the first and the biggest advantage of following conscience is that you are more humane in your approach. You deal with the problem with empathy, with compassion. So you could give an example of an old woman coming and asking for the ration when she doesn't have the valid documents. In this particular situation, your conscience would be a better guide to help you take that particular decision, that rather than laws, rules and regulations. Right? A young child traveling ticketless in the train who has lost his parents. In such a situation, conscience can be a better guide to help you arrive at a ethical decision rather than laws, rules and regulations. Because laws or rules or regulations तो कुछ और ही बोलेगी वहां पे. Accident के समय में एक आदमी ने red light jump कर ली. Laws, rules and regulations say something else, but conscience will say something else. Then you can say that it is less rigid. Unlike laws, it is less rigid in nature. तो इसलिए flexibility ज़्यादा provide करती है conscience to deal with different kind of situations which laws and rules may not be able to provide. Third that you can say is that laws and rules etc. may not be updated. हो सकता है कि ये जरूरी नहीं है हमेशा updated हो और बहुत सारे gaps हो सकते हैं. There can be several situations in which laws and rules may be silent. In such a situation, your conscience can come handy. So for example, someone comes and tells you that, see, I will be giving admission to your child in this school if you do this work for me. Now your law, rule, ethics, code of conduct may not necessarily prohibit you from doing so by providing help to that individual, but your conscience would be a better guide. Your inner voice would be a better guide. Right? So you could give the example of Gandhiji's talisman, which is an example of how you resolve an ethical dilemma relying upon your inner voice and your inner conscience. So some of the reasons because of which conscience is so important as compared to laws, rules and regulations. But you will say that it would not be correct to say that laws, rules and regulations don't have utility in resolving ethical dilemmas. So then what is the importance of rules, laws, regulations, etc. in resolution of ethical dilemmas? You should mention that as well. Here you could mention that they can help in adopting a common or a uniform approach, because conscience can lead to subjectivity. Conscience varies according to the cultural upbringing of a person as well. You may think something is right or wrong depending upon your conscience, which is shaped by your upbringing. You may think child marriage is okay, but illegal hai. You may think child marriage is okay because the society in which you were brought up in, it was perceived to be okay. 1 second, I'm just looking at the time right now. Right. So, yes, cultural upbringing can also be a factor which can influence your decision making when you're taking it basis of conscience. You can say that the conscience can lead to bias as well, because your biases may come in favor of a particular person or against a particular person when you are taking a decision, where rules and regulations help you in overcoming that bias as well, right? And then you can say that rules and regulations and laws can be enforced with the help of accountability measures. कॉन्शियंस के अंदर क्या है? आपने गट फीलिंग से कोई काम किया, उसकी कोई अकाउंटेबिलिटी नहीं है, आप जस्टिफाई नहीं कर सकते, जस्टिफिकेशन नहीं होता है। किसी लॉ रूल रेगुलेशन के बेसिस पे लिए हुए डिसीजन को आप बाद में जस्टिफाई कर सकते हैं, तो ऑब्जेक्टिविटी ज्यादा होती है, राइट? एंड इन योर कंक्लूजन यू मस्ट मेंशन दैट बोथ ऑफ देम आर इक्वली इंपॉर्टेंट. A civil servant must have the IQ and the EQ to understand which one has to be relied upon more in which situation, right? So that is something which you will be mentioning in this particular question. Is this clear to everyone? Very simple, straightforward question, and this is perhaps the easiest of the questions that was asked in this year's examination. Then let's look at the next question. Very simple question again. स्टैंडर्ड क्वेश्चन. प्रोबिटी पे यूपीएससी कम से कम नहीं तो 5 या 6 सवाल पूछ चुकी है, वेयर दे लास्ट ईयर दे हैड गिवन 30 वर्ड short note on probity in governance. So it says probity is essential for an effective system of governance and socio-economic development. Discuss. So in this particular question, no beating around the bush, nothing. Simply start by giving the definition of the term probity. And so first provide definition of probity. What is probity? Probity is following the highest standards of ethics in the functioning of any organization. That is what is probity, right? What is the importance of probity? और जब आप probity explain करें तो कुछ organizations के नाम दे दीजिएगा which have shown probity. UPSC could be one, the Election Commission of India could be one, ISRO could be one. These are organizations that have shown probity in their functioning. Now, when we talk about importance of probity, firstly, probity can help. अब देखिए, probity के दो चीजें हैं, इसमें दो लिखा है ना. What is the importance of probity in governance and in socio-economic development? So first, let's talk about importance of probity in governance. Governance के अंदर probity क्यों important है? You know, that is what the question is. So you see, essential for effective system of governance and for socio-economic development. So firstly, importance of probity with respect to governance. You will mention that it helps in maintaining the trust between the citizens and the government. It helps the citizens being more, the citizens wanting to approach the government more, right? So that is one. Secondly, you could say that probity is important because it brings objectivity in the decision making of the institutions. You're not driven by biases, nepotism, favoritism in decision making of an organization. Merit is always promoted. So that is also why probity in governance becomes so important. Then probity is important for effective governance because it prevents abuse of power. There are enough checks and balances. It prevents abuse of power. There are enough checks and balances. It ensures transparency and accountability in governance, and therefore ensuring effective governance in turn. यहाँ पे examples दीजिएगा. Give example of, let's say, the EPDS system of Chhattisgarh. Give example of the DBT scheme. Give example of the GEM portal of the government. All of these are examples of probity in governance which have helped us in achieving more efficiency, effectivity in the way the governance functions. यहाँ पे कुछ आप examples और ये भी दे सकते हैं. That it is said that if we can eliminate corruption, then we can witness a growth of at least 2% growth rate in our GDP. right? Economic growth rate can shoot up by 2%. You can also mention the importance of probity in terms of socio-economic development as well. So you may mention that the benefits of the government schemes would reach the actual beneficiaries if we follow probity in governance. You could give that example that out of 1 rupee spent by the government, only 15 paisa reaches the beneficiary. We can cut down on these leakages, we can cut down on these wastages that are happening within the implementation of various government schemes and programs if we adopt a approach of probity within governance, right? Then another aspect which you can mention is that probity can also help in making the country a better or an attractive investment destination. You can give the example of Singapore, how it has become an attractive investment destination for the other countries of the world because of the probity which is followed in the functioning of the institutions. You could also talk about the improved ease of doing business. So again, positive investor sentiment leading to better investment in the economy, leading to better socio-economic development as well. You can also say that it can lead to empowerment of the community. It can lead to empowerment of the community as well, because then the governance is not driven by selfish interest, but with the objective of doing the good for the people. You could talk about that it can lead to inclusive growth as well. The various sections of the society which have been kept out of the ambit of the economic growth can benefit as a result of the probity in governance. Once you have mentioned all of this, in the conclusion you can mention some of the measures that can be taken up in order to promote probity. For example, we must have stricter laws, we must have the introduction of e-governance, we must consider introducing a strong whistleblower protection law, grievance redressal mechanisms, single window clearance, RTI should be strengthened. All of those things could be mentioned that can be taken as a measure to promote probity in governance. Right? Very simple, straightforward question. Numerous questions have been asked related to this particular topic in the past, so there should have been no problem in answering this question. Let's look at the last question. Explain the term social capital. How does it enhance good governance? तो अब ये कह रहा है कि social capital की क्या मतलब बताइएगा और good governance के अंदर social capital किस तरीके का role play कर सकता है. What is social capital? Social capital is the network, the relationship, the trust that exists between the members of the society. Social capital is the intangible that helps in keeping the society together. The entire human society, remember, is based on trust. If today you are not trustful of the person sitting next to you, then you would not be sitting here, because आपको क्या पता कि वो कहां से बम निकाल के आपके ऊपर फेंक दे, अभी चक्कू निकाल के आपको मार दे. ट्रस्ट है, सोशल कैपिटल है ये. People are willing to help, people were willing to help each other during COVID, provide food to each other during COVID when people were locked down in their houses, again because of social capital, right? So social capital is the intangible, social capital is the trust that exists in the society between the members of the society that keeps the society floating. You will give example of social capital. You would say that social capital can be seen when people were willing to help each other during COVID-19, when several people lost their job and economic avenues. We witnessed social capital during a disaster such as the Bhuj earthquake, or such as the earthquake or the floods in Jammu and Kashmir. The recent floods in Himachal Pradesh, we saw social capital where people were willing to help each other going out of their way. That is what is social capital, trust in the society. Ab bada interesting question hai, because it is saying that how can social capital help in good governance? So firstly, you must in your answer mention about what is good governance. Good governance refers to governance that is carried out keeping certain ethical and certain basic principles, core values in mind, such as efficiency, effectivity, inclusivity, accountability, transparency, etc. Once you have mentioned this, right? So firstly, in this particular question, I'm just telling you the approach broadly, because we are running out of time now. So first is, we have already run out of time anyway. So definition of social capital, example of social capital. Secondly, give the meaning of good governance, or if not meaning of good governance, at least talk about what are the elements that should be present in governance to make it good governance. कौन से elements governance में present होने चाहिए to make it good governance, right? So that is what is called as the, यहाँ पे आप फिर ये elements mention करोगे, and then you will relate how social capital can help in achieving certain elements of good governance. अब देखिए, एक element of good governance, मैं example दे रहा हूँ एक, and you try to think of others on your own. Example is accountability. One of the elements of good governance is that the government should be accountable to the citizens. We can ensure greater accountability of the government to the citizens if there is cohesion between the citizens. अगर एकजुट होकर सवाल पूछेंगे गवर्नमेंट से, तो गवर्नमेंट को जरूर जवाब देना पड़ेगा. Give the example of जन सुनवाई that were organized by मजदूर किसान शक्ति संगठन in Rajasthan, और ऐसे और बहुत numerous examples हैं of how good governance can be ensured as a result of social capital, right? Then you can also say that social capital gives a better bargaining power to the citizens, and therefore they can demand more from the government, including transparency, including efficiency, including participatory governance. You can say that bargaining power can be increased. As a result of that, you can achieve greater participation of citizens in governance, which is an element of good governance. Greater participation of citizens in governance is an element of good governance that can be achieved again with the help of greater bargaining power that comes with social cohesion. That is another thing which can be mentioned, right, of how we can achieve good governance. So think of more on these particular terms only. And you can say that good governance का एक aspect होता है citizen centric governance, where the government should act according to the requirements of the citizens. अगर सोशल कैपिटल होगा तो लोग अपनी चॉइसेस, अपनी वॉइस को कलेक्टिवली एक्सप्रेस कर सकते हैं टुवर्ड्स द गवर्नमेंट टू गेट देयर वर्क डन. अगेन एन एग्जांपल ऑफ हाउ वी कैन यूज सोशल कैपिटल टू अचीव गुड गवर्नेंस. और एग्जांपल दीजिएगा, एसएचजीज का एग्जांपल बेस्ट है. एसएचजीज आर द बेस्ट एग्जांपल. सिविल सोसाइटी ऑर्गेनाइजेशंस, गिव द एग्जांपल ऑफ इंडिया अगेंस्ट करप्शन मूवमेंट, गिव द एग्जांपल ऑफ NCPRI, National Campaigns to People for Right to Information, Mazdoor Kisan Shakti Sangathan, the Kudumbashri Yojana of the Kerala government, again getting the women together, and then they are able to ask the government to focus on issues such as health, education, sanitation, etc., which concern them more. So give those particular examples. So the way you need to think in this question is think of elements of good governance, relate those elements of good governance to the social capital as a value, and what is the meaning of term social value. So see, now again, I don't think that it was possible to prepare the answer to this question beforehand. इस question का answer पहले से prepare करना बड़ा मुश्किल है. ये question वहीं पे आप answer सोच सकते हैं, you have to write it there only. But सारी चीजें आपके पास available हैं already. If you just apply a bit of common sense, and if you have faith कि जितना मैंने पढ़ा है, that is enough to write the answer to this question. And that is what I told you in the earlier discussions as well, that UPSC does not expect you to know everything before the exam. They expect you that you should be able to apply your knowledge and your understanding within the examination hall as well to arrive at the right answer. Right? So this is about the 6B question. Any questions, any doubts that you have, please feel free to ask. We will take 2 minutes more and then, yes. किसकी बात कर रहे हैं? हाँ हाँ. हाँ हाँ वो ठीक है, मैं समझ गया. Put a tongue नहीं है वो, you put honey on the tongue. हाँ, you can mention that. You can start with a quote when you are talking about the corruption question. Yes. There was some survey which had been done. I don't necessarily remember which survey, but there was a survey or a study which stated that, of course, this is all in realm of speculation, hai na? But this is what it had stated, that if corruption can be eliminated, we can witness a growth rate, jump in economic growth rate of the country. ठीक है? You will have to look up the exact resource. मैं आपको example दे रहा था कि इस तरीके का example दे सकते हैं. Yes, ma'am. One second, sir. ये एक मिनट इन्होंने start कर दिया. हम बोलिए. Yes. Hmm.
As an example, on the societal level, can we say that if the communities are trusting each other, then communalism can be prevented and good governance can be achieved?
Rule of law can be achieved, yes. Rule of law can be achieved as a result of social capital. That is an element of good governance. You can achieve social cohesion and therefore reduce the conflicts in the society and ensure better effective enforcement of the laws. Very good. You can mention that.
And the trust of people on government can prevent extremism and terrorism.
Yes, you can mention that. Trust of people on the government can prevent extremism, naxalism, etc. Yes, Hanji. You can mention, I mean, Robert Putnam is the guy who gave the concept of social capital to us in political science, but my point is that, I mean, you can do that, okay? But ethics का paper है, इसको जितना generic रखेंगे उतना अच्छा रहेगा, but you can mention, there is no hard and fast rule. Yes, any other question? Yes. Actually, if you look at it, largely the objective in both undue influence and coercion is the same only, to achieve something. है ना? But it is more direct and explicit in case of coercion. In undue influence, it is somewhere hidden. So you can say that. I agree with you that you can say that the motive largely is the same in both of them. Okay? Yes, any other questions? Okay, thank you so much.